What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Mitsu Talk Tech Talk. I'm here with Mr. Shaun from AO Customs. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good, Josh. How you doing, man?
I am great. It's always an honor to get to talk to you, and we're talking about something pretty serious today because I feel like DSMers as a whole kind of make a lot of the car world look bad in a way because we are known to just RTV everything instead of using a gasket.
Yeah, guilty of that myself for a long, long time.
Same.
But it's gasket in a tube. It says it right there in the tube.
Right.
Gasket maker. It wouldn't lie to me, would it?
And I don't think it's so much a thing where we're trying to save money or we're trying to, um, I don't know, take shortcuts. But I think it's a lot to do with a lot of the gaskets that we want that we use the RTV for. We can't find. If we can find, they're on the other side of the world, and it's going to take a week for us to get here. And the shootout is in 2 days, so I just RTV it and hope for the best.
Yeah, I agree, man. Like, I don't think anybody does stuff maliciously. And, I think we would all rather our cars were sealed up perfectly and didn't have any oil leaks or coolant leaks of any kind. But a lot of times it's an expedient matter, right? Like, I had to take this apart, tore the gasket that was on there. I'm going to goop it on with some RTV and get it back out there, right? Racing, driving, whatever, right? Like, we all have different places in our lives. So, yeah, I agree, man. Some of these gaskets just aren't available, or what's available isn't
Right.
very good.
But now we have you, someone from the Mitsubishi community, making these silicone gaskets for us for the parts that we can't find anymore, and really filling a void in the community, and not just our community, but you're reaching out and doing other cars as well. Um, and first off, thank you for filling that void and for keeping our cars on the road. We couldn't be able to do it without you unless we did RTV. We wouldn't be able to do it properly without you.
Yeah, and I'm always open to ideas, and I'm always trying to do more. Right now, I've kind of got a very specific product that I'm making and selling, and people will ask me for like oil pump covers, front cover gaskets and stuff like that I just don't think the current product can handle. But I've always got in the back of my mind, trying to do other things and other materials and other
Right.
applications, stuff like that. So if right now I don't have an offering for something, just know that I do. Like this whiteboard right here that you can see, these are my ideas and my pipeline, whatever business terms you want to use, that's the stuff that I'm working on. So yeah, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to be. So hopefully this is what I'll be able to keep doing for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think knowing you, I think you've opened a can of worms to be like, wow, there is really a need for this in our community, and it's a lot more than just the couple of things that you thought that the gaskets were going to fill a void for.
Yeah, it really just kind of started out with the automatic trans pans. They never seal, they're at an angle, so the bottom edge always sees fluid sitting on it, and it didn't matter. You could put a paper gasket on there, a cork gasket, no gasket, all the RTV in the world that you want, or whatever flavor that you want, and it would just drip, drip, drip. It wouldn't seal up. And that was this. Like, all right, I'm gonna give this a try, see if I can make something that'll actually seal this up. And lo and behold, it works. And that kind of snowballed. And here I am making stuff for Power Glides and LSs and Coyote engines and Ford 9-inch, just whatever I can make and sell.
Yeah. So, Shaun, what is the purpose of a gasket?
This is a good one. And I can thank my friend Matt Wheatley, who I've talked about in other talks. He's one of my big influences and somebody I look up to. But when we were talking about this, in private, he brought up to me, a gasket just takes up the space between two parts. In an ideal world, those two surfaces are perfectly flat and no gaskets needed. We don't live in an ideal world. Our machining isn't that good, and it probably will never be that good, right? So you have to have something in between to seal that up, right? Whether you're trying to seal in air or oil or water or whatever, right? So that's all that a gasket does. And that's why as DSMers, we're often able to get away with using only RTV. is because you've got a nice thick aluminum flange or steel flange over here and a nice thick flange over here, and they're pretty damn flat. You put it together with a little bit of something in between and it'll seal up for you. The problem is when you don't have a flat surface, either it's warped or it's got grooves or gouges, or it's something like the trans pan where as you tighten it down, it kind of bends and flexes and does weird things. That's where you actually need a physical solid substance in between those two surfaces to seal it up good.
Hang on, Shaun. That one was lagging behind a little bit. Let me.
No worries, man.
I'm gonna switch over to my hotspot on my phone. Maybe that'll be better.
Okay.
I might lose you for a second.
That's fine. I'll be here.
All right, you still there?
Oh, nope, I lost you.
Are you there?
Oh, you're back. Yeah, you hear me?
All right. Yep, I hear you perfect.
Okay. All right.
I don't know. That was so weird that didn't have any freezing parts on the last video, but I guess this one's just decided it's had enough.
Nah, I'm out.
All right, Shaun. So we talked about the RTV, the room temperature vulcanization, where it's kind of a gasket in a tube deal. And why is it not a good idea to use RTV everywhere?
So there's a lot of reasons here, and I'll hit a couple of salient points. Is when you bolt those surfaces together, you get that squish out. That squish out cures and makes those little round strings that we're all familiar with peeling off of our pans and whatever. And depending on where you're at on the engine, in the engine, it might be really bad. I've seen engines I've taken apart myself where there's huge chunks of cured RTV in the oil pickup tube, blocking oil pickup that needs to go through the engine and lubricate everything, right? Yeah. That's kind of like the worst case scenario is you block a pickup, but you don't want that stuff circulating anywhere, so that's why when you go and you read manuals, it's always a thin layer and you let it tack up and, there's all this process to it. But the other issue is, again, if you don't have two very rigid flat surfaces to come together, that RTV, it's got a heck of a job to do because it can only fill in so much. And if you squish it out and then something relaxes, pulls away, because that's something that we frequently don't think about is while we're running these engines, as they increase in temperature, increase in RPM, they vibrate. You've got thermal expansion, thermal contraction, harmonics, all this stuff moves, right? You think you bolt a head onto a block and that head stays where you bolted it. It does not. It moves, right? Everything moves. Well, that wreaks hell on those gaskets. Those gaskets have to be able to respond appropriately and deal with those vibrations, that growth, that shrinkage, all that stuff. And that's one of the things I think DSMers do know is on whole, we tend to be pretty smart guys. Like we know a lot of these things, because we talk about them because we have to. Right. So many of our cars are on the ragged edge of what they can do on their setups. And we're able to do that because as a community, we're pretty smart.
Right. But take a car that came factory with about 200 horsepower, make it a lot more than that.
Yeah. Right. Get 4 times the power out of the stock bottom end and be able to run in the 8s. Like it's pretty impressive. Right. And I know not everybody's doing that, but there's plenty of examples of, stock bottom end 4Gs making 3 times the power and living for a long time. Yeah.
When we talk about an oil tight seal, which, is arguably the toughest to achieve because we put a car together. We think we use all the right gaskets. We try to do everything right. And then we first start up, we see that just a little bit of oil dripping down the oil pan. So what gasket material is best for an oil tight seal?
Real good question, Josh. And, if there's any engineers listening, they'll know what I'm going to say. And that is, it depends on the application. I wish there was just one straight up answer that I could straight face tell you, but I'm not going to lie to you guys. It depends on the application. So, as we run these engines, they get hot, they get cold, they vibrate. You know, you've got thermal expansion, contraction, harmonics, all that stuff, right? Stuff moves around. You know, we think when we bolt a head to a block that it's going to stay where we bolted it, and that's not true. It moves around, right? Stuff moves. So it depends on the application. You sent me a list over here in our notes for the talk, and you have rubber, paper, silicone, cork, and I'm going to add RTV to that, right? No gasket at all. We just put the RTV in there and we bolt it together. So
Yeah.
cork's an older gasket. I personally don't like cork. They tear really easily. Even the rubber impregnated or silicone impregnated cork gaskets, I don't like them. I've used them. They always tear. And I mean, they tear on installation, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of them. If you've had luck with them, then great. I'm not saying that anything that anybody else is doing or is working for them is wrong. Just this is my personal experience. Don't like it. Paper's great. Paper makes a great gasket. And people have challenged me on forums and Facebook and stuff like that. Oh, you think your gaskets are better than paper? And my answer is always no. I'm not trying to replace paper. I'm not going to tell you that my gasket is better than paper. But what my gaskets are trying to do is fill a role that suits basically all the needs that we can. Right. The problem with paper is it goes down and it's monodimensional. It only smushes a little bit. Right. And once you smush it and you try to take it back apart, it tears. It adheres to the surfaces. So it doesn't have good serviceability. It doesn't do good with sealing things like oil pans and trans pans where the flange of the pan isn't truly flat. Sometimes there's a raised section. Sometimes there's a little groove. What I see a lot is when you bolt the pans down, where the bolt goes through the pan, it bulges. It pushes on the pan because all that pressure under the head of the bolt.
Right.
So paper's great. If paper's working for you, great. I like to be able to take my stuff apart without having to scrape a bunch of RTV, fight a paper gasket. I want to know that I'm at the racetrack. If I need to drop a pan, that I can drop it, put it back together. It's going to seal back up, stuff like that. It's good to go. And that's where the silicone comes in. And the gaskets I make are silicone rubber. You'll see, the butylene, EPDM. There's other kinds of rubber that, we're kind of talking about here under the rubber category. They're okay. They're fine. I've also had those where they're very soft. The durometer of the material is very soft, so it tears, either on assembly or disassembly. The silicone gaskets that I make, silicone rubber gaskets that I make, are a little bit harder durometer, so they live a lot longer. I've had them on my car on and off multiple times, multiple transmission rebuilds, stuff like that. My buddies that are running them, people in the community that are running them, right? We know these things live a long time. They do really good. They're a reusable gasket.
Right.
So the reason that the silicone does really good in most of our applications is it maintains its elasticity. When you compress it, you squish it, it's still pushing back. So if your two surfaces aren't perfectly flat, if, for example, you got a nice flat block on one side, the bottom of your engine block, and on the other side, you got an oil pan that's wavy and groovy and it's doing all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
That silicone will squish down and fill in those voids and seal up really nice. And we've seen that time and time again on a variety of different engines and applications and transmissions. I've got them for all kinds of different things, blow-off valves and throttle bodies. And I'm not trying to self-advertise here, but these silicone gaskets work really well in the majority of the applications. So having said that, there are certain applications that I'm not willing to try them on. And a great example of that is the oil pump front cover on a 4G63. I've had quite a few people ask me, hey, will you do that one? And yes, I can cut that gasket. There's nothing keeping me from making it. The problem is there's a couple sections where you've got a long, thin strip that doesn't have a bolt in the middle of it to hold pressure. And I know on one side you're going to have high pressure and on the other you're going to have lower. So, I'm worried that we're going to shove that gasket through. Yeah. And that, I think, is a great place where paper does better. The paper doesn't want to move laterally quite as much. Having said that, I've not tried it. I can get different thicknesses of the material so you have less push on it, blah, 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 right? We could try it. And in the future, I probably will. But for right now, that's an example where silicone isn't the right application. Paper, I think, is the right application. So it just depends as far as an oil tight seal.
Now, you talked about the blow-off valve gasket. I think a lot of people can relate to having that bottle of soapy water and spraying all your couplers and spraying your throttle body and trying to figure out where that boost leak comes from. I feel like there's very few things in this world that are more frustrating than trying to figure out which of your intake side gaskets, of your charge pipe gaskets, is leaking. So, what out of those materials that we talked about, the rubber, the paper, the silicone, or the cork, what is best for an airtight seal?
Uh, we rarely have factory parts on our cars,
Right.
right? Most of us, if we're running an MHI, a factory frame turbo, we've got some kind of aftermarket discharge pipe, whatever you want to call that pipe, right? And those flanges, they can vary. A lot of times it's an eBay part or whatever, and as it welded, it distorted, so there you go. That you got a distorted flange.
Yeah.
Silicone's a good place right there. You can put paper gasket on it and you can hit it with RTV. I've been able to get them to seal up, but like you said, very frequently you get after it with the spray bottle and you got a stinking leak. The same with the blow-off valve flanges. If you're running an aftermarket blow-off valve flange, check it for flatness. See if it really is flat. Sorry about that. I got the sun shining in my face here. But, I again, if what you're using is working for you and you got your stuff to seal up, fantastic. If you're having a hard time, the silicone being multidimensional and having that squish and filling in the voids really is it. And again, I don't like cork. By nature, the cork material is not homogeneous. Homogeneous means all the same thing the whole way through, right? You got like little chunks of cork that are kind of like fused together and rubber or silicone in between. I don't like the cork. So for me, again, to seal. And like we talked about earlier on, I don't love the way that the RTV squishes out and you got the little fingers and little frillies that you find in random places throughout the engine. So when I put on an RTV, I try to put that stuff on as thin as I can. But of course, nowadays, if I need a gasket, I go make myself a gasket, out of the silicone.
Plus, you run the risk of your engine potentially ingesting some of that RTV.
Yeah, right. And that's a scary thought. You hope that it gets hot in the intercooler, but with valve rust on it, and now all of a sudden I have a misfire, let alone if you pinch a piece of RTV or something in there, or, I just, nope, try to keep things as clean as you can. And that's where you'll have the most joy.
So let's talk about, you talked a lot about the transpan. I know maybe a lot of manual guys don't realize this, but the automatic transmission fluid is super hard on gaskets as a whole. Even, the rubber gaskets, you could run one for a season, and then by the time you drop the transpan again, it turns into like that, where it's almost like tree bark. You got to scrape it all off. It comes apart. It's all dried out. It's lost its internal moisture. So why should I choose a silicone gasket over the other ones for like a transpan specifically?
Yeah. So, what I'll talk about here, take opportunity of this question, is just talk about, the good things about a silicone gasket, why I chose silicone of the plethora of different materials. And silicone doesn't react with much. It does react with certain things, specifically petroleum. It reacts with gasoline. And that's why I don't offer an intake manifold gasket, because over time it will harden and do that kind of stuff, right? But that's straight gasoline. So other petrochemicals it doesn't necessarily react with or react with very quickly. So that's a boon, right? You have here in the notes, how does it stand up to heat? And it doesn't burn. It doesn't melt. Up until like 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't change its elasticity. It doesn't start to melt. It goes from being a uniform solid to being on fire around 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
So that's great, right? It's not, it's fantastic. As far as abrasive fluids, it handles that very, very, very well, right? Again, it's a kind of a bouncy surface. So, it doesn't get eaten away. The ATF specifically you mentioned has all kinds of different additives. It's the same base oil as the engine oil, but it has a different additive package to help bind and pick up all those clutch materials running through the transmission and clean and do yada, 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 do all that stuff. It handles that just fine. We've yet to see any kind of hardening or anything weird in using it on the transmission or on the oil pans. So, it has all these benefits. For the throttle bodies, it acts as a thermal barrier. Silicone is an insulator. It's not a conductor. So I had a guy recently asking me about a phenolic spacer, and if I would make a phenolic spacer and make a gasket for a phenolic spacer, this and that. And I told him, well, Sure, we can do that, but the gasket itself will actually act as a thermal barrier between your
Oh,
throttle body and your intake manifold, or whatever else. Yeah. Silicone is a fantastic insulator. So that's another kind of fringe benefit. It's kind of one of those just really good materials for the applications that we're using it for. It's got a lot of these just fringe benefits that kind of add up to making it a really nice, really usable material. And again, I think if you're trying to put a car together to drive every day to work, 50,000 miles or whatever, there's nothing wrong with a paper gasket. But if you're putting together a race car or a car that you think you might need to drop the pan, drop the trans pan, whatever, to either inspect it or service it or work on it,
yeah,
then you're gonna want a silicone gasket, because you're not gonna be fighting all that scraping and tearing a gasket and that kind of stuff.
right.
So
It
that's my 50 cents on it. Yeah.
keeps you from bringing all like a big load of gaskets to the track with you every time you go out, because a lot of these silicone gaskets you could reuse instead of having to replace it like a paper one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've never seen one tear. You know, of all my friends that are running them, all the other guys that are running them, I've never seen a silicone gasket tear. Um, it just, it's fantastic. It's a really good material for what we're using it for.
Good deal. Well, Shaun, thank you so much for teaching us about gaskets and about the different materials. And I hope that everybody out there learned something. And that's it. We'll see you on the next one.